And Derek, you're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you, Summer. Thanks everyone for meeting back here after a week off. Hope everyone had a good week off, a good chance to catch up, to dive in deeper on the reading or any subjects that so far have been giving you any trouble. This week we're gonna keep the good times rolling with a topic that is very important, obviously, to financial wellness in general, and that's risk management and insurance. It's also um, I find there's a lot of myths and a lot of misinformation out there about insurance. And I also find that it's such a broad topic that it can seem very complicated because it's difficult once you kind of understand one category of insurance. It doesn't necessarily mean that you understand all of them. We're going to go through the major types of insurance tonight, that being health insurance, that being life insurance, renters and homeowners, auto insurance, long-term care. We're going to briefly touch on every kind of insurance. So my general kind of recommendation is, have a handle on the high level concepts for these insurance types, certainly for the exam, but then as you kind of progress in your counseling career, you're going to want to just continue to be a student of each one of these types of insurances, because there's different nuances to each one. I mean, there's the general risk and insurance terminology that we'll start with that applies to all of them, right? Your premium, what's your deductible, what's your out-of-pocket expenses, what is a policy, what's a broker, like where can you get these things? So those types of concepts apply across the board. But then once you get into the individual specific types of insurance, that's when it starts to get a little bit more nuanced as to what types of products are available, where you get them, and who might benefit from having them. So again, we're going to cover each one tonight in an introductory review fashion. For a much deeper dive on these, I highly recommend you keep doing reading and become a student of each one in particular as you advance through your counseling careers. So let's start with that kind of overarching insurance terminology. In insurance, true or false? In insurance, a hazard and a peril are the same thing. What do we think? Put it in the chat panel. True or false? A hazard and a peril, are they the same thing from a strictly terminology viewpoint in insurance? I see most folks are putting in false, right? And you would be correct if you said that they are not the same thing. It's so, and this is one of the things where insurance starts to get confusing right from the get-go, because you're like, a hazard and a peril, they're the same thing, right? Well, no, not technically when it comes to insurance and how they classify dangers to people, right? But it all comes down to the basic exposure, which in insurance terminology is a source of risk, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean that it is an inherently dangerous activity. It just means that by doing this, or by having a certain product, or by doing some sort of even a daily activity like driving a car, you are exposing yourself to potential risk, right? So what is a peril then? A peril would be an event that can cause a financial loss, an event that can cause a financial loss. So let's go with our example of driving a car, right? If we go back and say, okay, the exposure is that we're going to drive a car. Let's say that the peril, which is an event that can cause a financial loss, would be what? A car accident, right? So you can already see the difference between exposure and peril. Exposure is just the action that you're doing, doesn't necessarily mean that something has happened yet, but it could by nature of you doing it. A peril, it will be an event that can cause a financial loss. In this case, in our example, maybe a car accident, right? So then what is a hazard? Okay, if a peril is an event that can cause financial loss, a hazard is a condition that increases the possibility of a peril occurring. I even think of it as increasing the probability of a peril occurring. So in our situation with in our example, let's start to think of this. If the exposure is driving a car if the peril is a potential car accident, what are some potential hazards using the definition that you see on the screen here? Okay, so we have icy roads, texting while driving, bad weather, drunk driving, right? Whether a construction, whether there's sun in your eyes, or if it's too dark. So these could all be considered hazards. So as you can see, these are not, if you're driving tired, if you have poor car maintenance, there's some sort of like technological malfunction on the car, if a deer jumps in front of you, these are all hazards, okay, that are increasing the likelihood of a car accident, which is our peril. So I would just say that's, to me, is some of the easiest that's one of the easiest examples to remember the difference between exposure, hazard, and peril. So I highly recommend you find that scenario that works for you to delineate between those three concepts. And if you can remember that, risk of your exposure is driving a car, and your peril is a car accident, your hazard are all those things we just listed that increase your possibility of getting into an accident, you're in good shape for understanding the concepts, right? So let's just kind of walk through these. So we used our car example here on the top. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. Right, we have our right there. So our hazard in this, they said it was driving while intoxicated, but you named you put together an even more exhaustive list of potential auto hazards, right? So home is another exposure, right? Owning a home, you have an exposure to risk of certain perils, like the house burning down, right? The house catching on fire is one example of a house peril. So a condition that would increase the possibility of the house catching on fire would be older faulty wiring in the house, right? Health is another, a health exposure, which is one that none of us that are on the online tonight can avoid at the moment, is living, right? So exposure is just living in general for health and life, right? Just being alive is an exposure to risk. Risk like things like chronic illness, like heart attack, like stroke, like death, like any of these things are all named perils for being alive, okay? So there are certain hazards that increase our likelihood of experiencing these perils, such as high blood pressure, maybe it's poor diet, maybe it's some sort of maybe it's some sort of genetic predisposition, right? That could be considered a hazard because it will increase your likelihood of a peril. Okay, and moving toward life, obviously one peril of living is dying. And that's something that it's uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about, which you'll find in your counseling when it comes to like life insurance conversations. I used to be a licensed insurance broker in a former career. And this is one of those topics that so many people just do not like facing, is their own mortality, right? Understandably so. But it is extremely important to talk about, especially if they have folks who are dependent on them for income and livelihood, and or if they have massive debts that might be passed on to loved ones. So talking about life insurance is a huge deal. So yeah, it's the only certainty of life is death and taxes, right, Marguerite? That's right. So hazard of increasing likelihood of death, certainly wartime, right? If you're in combat would be one, but there are several, right? There are several that we could think of. So grab one of these scenarios for risk identification terms, internalize it for the exam, and just be comfortable with those examples so that you can just quickly pull on them to delineate between those terms. So what are your options when you are faced with risk? What can you do with regard to that risk? So Artie says avoid it. Yeah, you could avoid it entirely, right? What else could you do? Transfer it, retain it. reduce it, mitigate it, right? Control, like loss control, right? So these are all kind of leading to some of the risk strategies that are outlined for you when it comes to your insurance options, right? You can avoid risk altogether. You can retain risk up to a certain point. You could transfer risk to an insurance company. You could reduce risk by reducing your, engaging in activities that are hazards. You could control your losses, and we'll look at some examples of all of those strategies in a minute. I think you all pretty much nailed those. What are the two most important factors to consider when managing risk, though? Can we think of the two most important factors when it comes to managing risk? Perfect. Yeah. Suzanne Kimmerer said severity and frequency. So when it comes to whether or not you're thinking about retaining risk, transferring risk to an insurer, mitigating risk by controlling how much of it you retain or how much you participate in a certain activity, you're probably going to be impacted by these two concepts: the frequency of the risk, how often could a peril occur, and the severity, like how deep of a blow would it be to you financially. And so these two, the answer to those questions will help dictate what types of insurance coverages you buy and how much coverage for each you actually get to transfer risk to the insurance company. So let's just do a nice overview of these different strategies here together. So risk avoidance would be, in our example for our car example, is don't drive at all, right? So risk avoidance, this would eliminate your risk of, this would eliminate your exposure to certain perils, like getting in a car accident. If you didn't drive at all, you wouldn't have that thing. But so for a lot of people, this may not be realistic, right? But it is something, it is one option when managing risk. Risk reduction means that you're going to drive defensively. It means you're going to reduce the possibility of a peril occurring, which would be a hazard, right? You're going to reduce hazards by taking steps to reduce risk, which one would be driving defensively. Another might be taking certain highways or side roads that are less traveled, or maybe there's an infrastructure issues on one bridge, so you take another bridge. So these are all examples of reducing risk when driving that would be reducing hazards. Risk transfer, this is where you get the insurance company involved and where you're transferring financial risk to an insurer. And that's really what we're talking about here. You're transferring financial risk to an insurer. Risk retention would be the amount of financial risk you feel comfortable shouldering. The fancy term for that is a deductible. Okay? So when you pay a deductible, that is what you pay out of pocket before an insurance company will start kicking in to help you cover any sort of financial liability as a result of an event like a car accident in this example. Okay, so there's transfer and retention. Those are the big two. That's when you start to get the insurance companies involved, and to the extent that you get them involved will depend on your perception of the severity and frequency of the perils occurring. Loss control, this is where you're going to reduce the severity or frequency of loss. An example is drive less expensive car, which would obviously reduce the severity of loss if you were to get in an accident, right? Or in installing a car alarm might reduce the frequency of car theft. And so you can see there are loss control measures that are being taken there to really impact the severity or frequency specifically. So have a nice, again, this is using that car example, which I think kind of works really nicely to just really internalize all of these concepts. So feel free to use that for the exam and for just general practice. Have that example where you can call on that example and talk somebody through the difference between all these concepts yourself. And, you know, this one lends itself to it nicely, but if you're more comfortable with another, then by all means use that. So continuing with our general insurance terminology, what is a premium? What do we got? What is a premium? Yeah, you know, in the most simple terms, it is the cost of insurance. In practical terms, it is what you pay to have the insurance, and usually it's paid monthly or annually. Okay, usually it's paid monthly or annually. What's a deductible? I kind of already went over this, right? That's the amount paid out of pocket before the insurance benefits begin, right? So let me ask you this. What is the relationship between a premium and your deductible? Is it a direct relationship? Is it an inverse relationship? What do we think? Yeah, so it's an inverse relationship, meaning what? Normally, it's something like Artie or Lisa say, you know, the higher the deductible, the lower the premium, right? And so why is that? When you have a high deductible, in our insurance terminology, you are retaining more risk. So the insurance company is going to charge you less because you're taking on more of the risk should an accident occur or whatever, or a medical expense come to pass. You're going to take on more of the risk, so they're going to charge you less per month, and that's all based on their tables, you know, that their actuaries will be running to figure out how in the end they can still turn a profit, because by the way, insurance companies are for-profit enterprises, right? They're not really in the business of losing money. And they have very complicated and professional and very skilled folks working on making sure that they're still profiting, right? But they're going to provide a benefit with pooled money to all the folks that are covered with policies. So the higher the deductible, lower the premium, and vice versa. That's what I mean by they have an inverse relationship. So which is better, high deductibles or low deductibles? Lisa's already mastered the financial planning answer. Number one answer is it depends. We all do, right? Yes, we all say it depends. It totally does, right? That there is no right answer here. It really depends on your situation, right? A high deductible will be a low premium. And maybe if you don't have a lot of healthcare costs throughout the year, that might be a way you go. And you want to have a low premium, and maybe you pay a couple $100 here and there for healthcare expenses, and you keep your total out of pocket costs throughout the year low. Or maybe you have the flip side, and you know you have a lot of medical expenses, and you still want to have a low monthly premium because maybe your cash flow is such that that's what you can handle. But when you know you're going to spend so much that you're going to funnel some money through like an HSA account, and you're going to pay those for the annual deductible, and then past that the insurance company will kick in. So this is really there's a really a strategy involved with the types of plans you choose and how you set your deductibles based on, you know, sometimes it might be set for you based on your monthly ability to pay premiums, but other times it may be set on your expected annual healthcare expenses when it comes to health insurance. Okay, whether you know that you're going to have a lot of healthcare expenses coming, or you know that you have very low minimal healthcare expenses. If you're healthy, in good shape, then that'll play into this decision as well. Vocabulary check. What is the large loss principle? What does it mean? What does it kind of recommend? Yeah, so we have a couple answers here. Basically, transfer risk you can't afford and retain the risk that you can, right? This is very similar to kind of like the concept of an emergency fund. Remember, an emergency fund is kind of for short-term unemployment, or for smaller to moderate sized unexpected expenses, like blowing a car tire or replacing a computer or something like that. Those are the things that you might be able to retain, and that's where an emergency fund comes in. The emergency fund can also be obviously covering a deductible for healthcare costs. So that's part of what should be built in to an emergency fund, right? So having that means you are retaining that risk, and an insurance exists for you to transfer risk for those things that are above and beyond that you can shoulder, or in practical terms, above and beyond your emergency fund, right? I like to think of it that way. Your emergency fund is your own way of self-insuring for retaining your own risk, whereas anything above and beyond that, that's what insurance is for. What is the most expensive type of insurance? Do we know? What guesses do we have? Okay, yeah, we know, right? So I already jumped right in. Health insurance. Sure is. Yeah, sure is. At first, my initial thought was maybe it's whole life insurance, because that's pretty pricey. But when you think about health insurance, especially for those making over a certain threshold, and so they're not eligible for subsidies through like healthcare exchanges or anything like that, and especially for those who are self-employed, who don't have an employer who are kicking in a good bit of the healthcare policy costs, these things can be very, very expensive quickly. So yeah, it is health insurance is very pricey. Co-payment. Okay, this is a payment required at each transaction before insurance coverage begins. We usually associate it with like preventive healthcare checks at your doctor. So you pay a copay, maybe it's $10, maybe 20, maybe 40, whatever it is, it's set by your plan. You just pay that at each transaction before insurance coverage begins, okay? For that visit, in that case. Co-insurance, on the other hand, is different from co-payment. It's a type of insurance where a percentage is paid by the insured. That's you, okay? So I want you to start to think about these with like real numbers, okay? So say that you had a healthcare plan, and you had you go and you have a visit and you have a copay of $10. Okay, that's coming out of your pocket, and then you have a deductible for the year of $1,000, say, for example. And maybe there's something that happened at the visit, or you have to go and get a couple x-rays or some blood work or something, and you're going to be paying that deductible. Or let's just say you break your arm or something, so they're going to have to do some stuff, and so you pay that deductible of $1,000 before your insurer kicks in to start helping you out, right? Let's say the total cost of this deal is $2,000. Total is the total bill. So you paid $1,000 of that, right? So $1,000 is left. Let's just say now that you have a 20% co-insurance. So of the remaining $1,000, okay, so in this case, the copay, let's just take that off the table because this is for like a broken arm. So this isn't a preventive visit or anything like that. But let's just say we have a broken arm, and you have a deductible of $1,000, $2,000 total bill, 20% co-insurance, okay? So let me ask you this. How much are you paying, and how much is the insurer paying? Perfect. Yeah. So this is a very easy example with simple numbers. And again, when it comes to this concept, which I call MOOP, right? Maximum out of pocket. Make sure that you can pull an example like this to the top of your mind real quick, so that you're just understanding the difference between copay, you're understanding the difference between copay, deductible, and co-insurance, and when each type of thing kicks in, okay? Notice that the deductible was the $1,000 toward the bill. It did not include like any co-pays from the year, because a lot of times the co-pays won't apply towards your deductible. So that's just another little thing to be aware of. Okay. So let me clear that. There we go. Okay, so out-of-pocket maximum, that's what I just talked about, your MOOP, right? Maximum out-of-pocket, the most an insured person will have to pay each year, and it resets the following year, and that's how you figure it out. Obviously, if you have co-insurance on top of a deductible, your maximum out-of-pocket is going to be higher than if you just had a deductible, and then the insurer is going to kick in everything else above that, okay? And the MOOP does not usually include premiums. I think that's what I said. And you know, I think I said the co-payment doesn't go towards the MOOP. I might actually be wrong about that. Maybe I was confusing it with the premiums. But in any event, I don't believe the premiums go towards the maximum out-of-pocket, Summer. Qualified medical expenses. Okay, so this is a different deal. So with qualified medical expenses, we're not talking about expenses that are just qualified by nature of being medical. Okay, no, we're talking about the IRS. Okay, if you think to like investment vehicles like college savings plan, 529 savings plans, and if you use those for qualified academic expenses, everything you pull out of those accounts are tax-free. And the list of qualified academic expenses is set by the IRS. Well, the same thing applies here to qualified medical expenses. They set the list of these qualified expenses, and you can, if you use accounts such as like a health savings account or an FS, like a flex spending account, then you can contribute to like an HSA or an FSA, and whatever you contribute is tax deductible in the year that you contribute it, which is pretty awesome. And then inside a health savings account or a flex spending account for healthcare expenses, you can invest the money in mutual funds and stuff like that. And so it grows tax deferred. And then if you use it for qualified medical expenses, it'll be tax-free. The growth will be tax-free. So these accounts are what they call triple tax advantaged, which is pretty awesome. It's one of the best deals you can get out there. And so an HSA is pretty awesome for that. Okay. And I just went over this, the two tax sheltered accounts for medical expenses. All right, I skipped, I got excited and I talked about them, the health savings account and the flexible spending account. So the CARES Act that came about in last spring, because due to the coronavirus pandemic, actually expanded eligible expenses for these accounts, expanded eligible medical expenses to include things like feminine hygiene products, over-the-counter medications without a prescription. So the CARES Act actually expanded the list, which is pretty cool for a lot of folks, right? But other common medical expenses that you can pay for with an HSA or an FSA are like things like, obviously, like an ambulance, transportation, flu shots, chiropractic and acupuncture you can even pay for, insulin if you're diabetic. There is a long list, right? Drug addiction treatments, vaccines, surgeries, even things like addiction therapy programs, substance abuse treatment programs, and things of that nature. So, physical therapy, Melissa says contacts. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, right? If you're diabetic too, like blood sugar testing kits. So there's the list is pretty long. It doesn't cover everything though, like supplements, I think not prescribed by a doctor, massages, weight loss programs, stuff like that. So there are a list of things it doesn't cover, but honestly, the list of things that it does cover are longer. So that's good. And it doesn't cover like general, these don't cover like general, like daily household things like lotion and mouthwash and stuff like that. We love HSAs. HSAs are amazing because for the reasons I just mentioned. The reason HSAs are, I think, a lot cooler than FAs than flex spending accounts are because HSAs, you can build your balance in the account and you never lose it. It rolls over year to year, which is very, very powerful. You can only really open an HSA though if you have a high deductible health plan. Yeah, because they say, well, geez, if you're going to have a high deductible and you want to run money through an HSA to pay that high deductible, we know you're going to be paying that, so we'll give you this tax benefit along the way. So if you don't have a high deductible health plan, then you can't open an HSA. It's just something to be aware of. Okay. FSAs, what's considered high, and that's also something that is set by the IRS. And so I would just do some little bit of research on that AYA and look at what's the limit on deductibles for high deductible healthcare plans. And I think it's something like somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000 a year is the lower limit, but I'd have to look to see. Again, money carries forward indefinitely, which means you can build your savings in that account over your lifetime. The IRS does set how much you can contribute to these things. You can't contribute unlimited amounts. So in 2021, the maximum contribution for a single HSA is $3,600 for the year, $3,600. For a family HSA, it's $7,200. So again, very cool deal. So if you don't use all of it, you don't lose it. With an FSA, you do lose it. There are things that if you're, by the way, your FSA has to be offered through your employer. So your employer can actually work with the plan administrator to roll over a certain amount of an FSA. It doesn't mean you lose all of it. Sometimes they'll roll over like $300 to $500 or something like that. But generally it's a use it or lose it type of an account. Whereas an HSA is not, which is why HSAs are so neat. Now, HSAs, you can build over your lifetime. And that's why there's kind of considered these to be something where they've been called super Roths, right? Super Roths, HSAs, not FSAs. And the reason that they're called super Roths is because people use them in retirement to pay their healthcare expenses tax-free. So they act like a Roth IRA for retirement, but for your medical expenses, which are going to be the highest expenses out there. They say that for a couple in retirement, for a couple living 30 to 35 years in retirement, the average cost for healthcare is going to be anywhere between $250,000 to $300,000. So it's the largest expense in retirement, and so HSAs are considered a very powerful tool to help with that. So anyway, that's a healthcare account, and they are used in conjunction with high deductible healthcare plans. Types of health insurance out there, types of health insurance structures. There's health maintenance organizations and there's PPOs. Health maintenance, just know the difference between these two, okay? Health maintenance organization is a single organization providing healthcare coverage and insurance. With an HMO, right, you generally need to have a primary care physician that's going to provide referrals to specialists, okay, for you. So just know that about an HMO, and know that that's kind of one of the deals with the HMO. Whereas a preferred provider organization, you're going to have more flexibility because there's a group of health providers that are in network that contract with health insurance companies to provide services. So with a PPO, more flexibility, higher cost. So that's what I want you to think about with the HMO, less control and flexibility because you have to go through a primary care physician to get specialist visits. But because of that, lower cost, generally speaking. With a PPO, when you have more flexibility and more control, and you can just go see specialists whenever you need to that are in network. And with a PPO, you can also go out of network and have some coverage out of network, but you pay for that, okay? You pay a higher premium for a PPO than an HMO. So those are the primary differences that you should be aware of. with regard to those two plans. And by the way, the PPOs and HMOs, you're going to find those through an employer healthcare plan. A lot of times employers will have one selected for you, whether it's a PPO choice or they may offer you one through work that they're going to help subsidize you pay for. But if you go through the healthcare exchanges, you can find HMO and PPO plans in all of the metals, the bronze all the way up through platinum. They're going to have different options across these two structures. And again, it's going to come down to the flexibility that you're looking for. If you do need to see multiple specialists, maybe choosing a PPO is worth the cost. All right. Financial trivia. What is COBRA besides a very scary snake? When it comes to health insurance, what is COBRA? Who's going to answer first in the chat panel? May not be, may not know. There you go. Already jumped in. Yes. Yes. There we go. We were just typing our answers. Yes. There you go. Consolidated Omnibus Act, right? So this is after you leave an employer, then you can still have access to health insurance, their plan for up to 18 months. It's just that you're going to have to pay more of the cost for that plan during those 18 months. So I remember when I left the military, I still had access to TRICARE, which was our military provided health coverage, but I had to pay I had to shoulder more of the cost of it. So it ended up being cost prohibitive. It made much more sense to just go through my next employer. And if the Affordable Care Act was in play at that time, it would have also made a lot of good sense to just go through a healthcare exchange and just get subsidized healthcare at that point, because I had a lower income in the transition. So there's a lot of options maybe for folks who are in transition besides going with COBRA, but it is something to be aware of. True or false? You can have both Medicaid and Medicare at the same time. What do you think? Yeah, it's true. Okay, it is true. So generally kind of know the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, okay? And who is eligible for each, okay? Medicare primarily being the health insurance program from the federal government for people who are 65 or older. What I think a lot of people don't realize is that younger people with disabilities and other folks with end-stage renal disease, which is a kidney failure disease, are also eligible for Medicare. Medicaid, on the other hand, it's not limited to folks 65 or older. It actually provides health coverage to, Medicaid is the most common provider of healthcare in the United States. It provides health coverage for millions and millions of people because it includes eligible low-income folks. It includes certain children. It includes pregnant women, elderly adults, people with disabilities. One difference between Medicaid and Medicare that you probably are already aware of is that whereas Medicare is administered by the federal government, and Medicare is accepted by the vast majority of healthcare practitioners out there, Medicaid is administered by the states. So that's why there are some state eligibility rules for Medicaid that are slightly different from the federal government rules for Medicaid, but they're administered by the state. So just kind of know the general difference between the two as you're studying for the exam. And if you find that you might have Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, Derek, you're muted there for a second. I let somebody in the room and that somehow muted you.
Oh,
You're good to go.
Good. Yes. as I was saying, if you find that you're going to be working with a population that will have more questions about these, there are some fantastic resources at the websites for Medicare and Medicaid, like Medicare.gov, and they have huge handbooks, and just everything you need to know are right there for free, downloadable PDF, and download them, check them out every year. And I think they're great resources. I actually use them to teach a class that I teach at a university. I see, Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal is the California Medicaid program, I believe. Okay. Is the Medicaid program for California. All right. Okay, so here you go. Here's a recap of everything I just said. See, I'm just so excited about some of these things. I just jumped a slide too early, I guess. Medicaid's regulated by the states for low-income individuals. Supplemental security, like Social Security insurance, is also like Medicaid SSI for those who need it, who have low income. So in that way, Medicaid is more of a welfare program in terms of even income than Medicare for sure. And usually Medicaid has small or no premiums and deductibles. Medicaid is a way that many folks pay for long-term care insurance at long-term care facilities and things like that. So Medicaid, again, is the largest insurer for healthcare costs in the United States. Medicare is a federal program and used primarily in the context here for folks who are retired over the age of 65. It does have premiums, deductibles, co-payments, and co-insurance associated with it, depending on your income when you get it. And when we're talking about premiums, we're really talking about the Part B. So we're not going to be Medicare experts on the call here tonight, but just know generally that there are two approaches to having Medicare, to Medicare coverage, and they are original Medicare, which is where you would sign up for Parts A, B, D, and what they call a Medigap policy. And or you could go the second route, which would be something called Medicare Advantage, okay, which is kind of a bundled product that gives you all the coverages associated with Parts A, B, and D for original Medicare. And the reason that you want this Medigap policy for original Medicare is because, again, in Part B, original Medicare, which would be like doctor expenses. Part A is for hospital expenses, primarily. Part B is for like your outpatient doctor expenses, which has co-payments and deductibles. So if you can't afford those, people will go out and buy a Medigap policy to help pay for those from an insurance broker. And then Part D is for drug coverage. Medicare Advantage is an alternative product that you can get that bundles all of these together. And so in that way, it's a little bit more consolidated and streamlined and easier to maybe navigate logistically, but it may not be the right choice depending on where you live, what kinds of coverage you need, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to this stuff, just know that there's generally two approaches. Again, if you're going to be working with a population that deals with Medicare a lot, you're going to want to research more of this. You're going to want to talk to some experts or have some referrals on hand that you can refer folks to try to figure out the strategy that works best for them when it comes to Medicare. All right. Short-term health plans are something that have been kind of taking healthy folks away from longer-term health plans because they offer lower premiums. But the question here is true or false. They can deny coverage for pre-existing conditions, short-term health plans. Is that true or false? A mixed bag here, some falses, some trues. Yeah, so here's the deal, folks. Short-term health plans actually are not subject to the Affordable Care Act provision that requires health insurers to cover pre-existing conditions. Short-term health plans are an alternative approach to standard healthcare solutions that are covered under law by the Affordable Care Act. And so they're a little bit riskier in that way. Okay. So know what they are, but know that they also can deny coverage for pre-existing conditions. These are plans that they may offer coverage for up to a year with the ability to extend past that, but they're not the same as more of a permanent healthcare solution. True or false, transitioning here to some renters and homeowner stuff. True or false, renters insurance is usually cheaper than homeowners insurance. Yeah, totally true. Renters insurance obviously can cover your goods, your valuables if they incur damage or lost or stolen or vandalized. They just don't have that dwelling component that homeowners insurance has. So they're cheaper. Renters insurance does have a liability component, which a lot of people don't know about. Renters insurance, a form of insurance that protects the contents of a dwelling or vehicle. And usually you take pictures of the stuff you want protected, you inventory them, and you're off to the races. This is, I've had renters insurance for a while, even though I don't rent anymore, but we still carry it because it's like $10 a month. So homeowners insurance, on the other hand, is insurance that combines property insurance and liability insurance. And this is a huge deal, okay? So true or false, is homeowners insurance required by law? If you said false, you would be correct. It's not required by law. However, if you are getting a mortgage for your home, is it required? Yes. Yeah, your lender's going to want it, right? Because they're going to have like an interest in your property. So if something happens, they're going to want to be able to replace it. So property insurance as part of homeowners insurance is the insurance that covers the cost of repairs or replacement of property. There's two types of insurance that are dealt with here. Actual cash value, or there's reimbursement, right? And just kind of understand the cash value. What does that mean, right? That the cash value can mean they can pay you for the value of the dwelling, which would include depreciation. So it's not the actual cost to replace it per se, whereas replacement equals the actual cost of replacing. So just a little bit of a distinction there. Liability insurance, which is bundled in with your homeowner's insurance, this is what provides financial protection when you are legally liable for someone else's loss. Okay. So it's a huge deal to have proper liability insurance, not just with homeowners, but also on your auto policy. Okay. Liability insurance on your house. I think this is one of those things that we are generally underinsured in. And so one of the things you might want to look at as a result of this, your studies, is the amount of your liability insurance on your in your homeowner's policy. I just think that, oftentimes we get in there and there might be like a minimum that an insurer has to give you, which might be like $100,000 of liability insurance, which if somebody came to your property and slipped and fell and broke their hip, or even if you were on somebody else's property and there was some damage due to your negligence and they brought a lawsuit against you, $100,000, the great thing about this liability coverage is it covers your court fees, but $100,000, as we know, can go pretty fast when it comes to these things. So make sure that you have enough liability insurance, okay? Homeowners insurance, let's talk about a couple considerations. All peril versus named peril. What in the world are we talking about here? I guess I'll pull out my text tool here. So when it comes to homeowners insurance, there's what are called homeowners insurance forms, okay? These are things like HO3, like they're called HO dash a number, like HO3, which is the most commonly used homeowners insurance form, HO1, which is like a basic form, and HO2, which is more broad than the HO1, and then something like an HO8, which is another form that protects older homes. By the way, if you're interested at all, homeowners insurance, I think it's HO4 is renters insurance. Anyways, these are the forms, and what they are is it's just kind of like a template for your homeowners insurance coverage. If you want to think about it as a template, the HO3 is called a special form, and it's most common because it's this all peril form, and that means that it covers repairs if your home is damaged by any peril that you can think of, unless the peril is specifically called out in the policy documents as being excluded, like, I don't know, like an earthquake, okay, or something like that, or a flood. In which case you would have to buy some supplemental insurance to cover yourself against those, okay? So a lot of these HO forms goes back to like what sort of perils are covered. The HO3 is the special form that covers like all perils. And then again, the most common you'll see out like are fire, lightning, windstorms, vandalism, theft, stuff like that. Falling objects and water damage. These are all things that are covered under like an all perils form. An HO1 form is a basic form. It just covers less perils, okay? A broad form for an HO2 covers a little bit more than the HO1, and then it goes on, so on and so forth. And actual cash value versus replacement cost, we already talked about the difference of those. So those are something you want to think about when you're thinking about your coverage, okay? Property component, in the policy, you're going to have a named structure. There is also going to be personal property that can be covered. Generally, in homeowners insurance, personal property has like a limit. It might only be covered up to like $1,500 per item or something like that. So if you have jewelry that's more expensive than that, you're going to want to get something called a floater policy on those items, which is like an additional policy to cover your floater items. Remember floater because they can float. They're more mobile, like they can go out of the house and still be covered under your homeowner's policy. And then obviously the liability component, this is where it covers personal liability outside of work and use of vehicle, because in work you might be covered through your employer, and the use of vehicle, your liability is going to be covered by the personal auto policy, which we'll talk about next. It also covers someone injured while on your property. You know, the general example is someone slipping on ice on your front steps and hurting themselves. Well, that's due to your negligence, which is the cornerstone of liability claims. So if it was due to your negligence, then they can bring suit against you. And this is where your liability component of your homeowner's policy will take hold. And so often, if we don't have enough coverage there, which many people do not, they might also own something called an umbrella policy that will give them additional liability insurance above and beyond what's offered through their homeowners and auto insurance policies. In fact, I would not be surprised if that's coming up right now. Wow. This is a very intuitive deck, Summer. I just want to say that I did not rehearse it. It just is so funny. It flows so nicely. Umbrella liability insurance. This is what I was just talking about. If you have catastrophic liability, it covers you above amount covered by your other insurance. Again, remember, liability insurance is most commonly bought bundled with homeowners and auto bundles liability. Remember that. So above and beyond that, an umbrella is going to have you covered. Remember? Just remember that an umbrella is going to cover you. That's an easy way to remember it. By the way, it's not super expensive. An umbrella is not expensive to get an extra $1 million in coverage. Is not as expensive as you would think to have an umbrella policy. So it's a very smart idea. It's also a tremendously smart idea if you're a business owner or if you're in a partnership where you are a general partner, because general partners assume liability for the business. So a lot of general partners at major firms will have umbrella policies because any losses can pass through to them. So just an extra note on that. Okay, so shifting gears from homeowners now to cars. I told you we were going to cover everything tonight here in relatively short order. So let's shift gears a little bit now to auto insurance. comprehensive auto insurance is required by law, focusing in on the word comprehensive. Is that true or false? Okay. No, comprehensive auto insurance is not, right? Comprehensive auto insurance is not. Comprehensive is one of those things that a lot of folks, you gotta, if you understand a personal auto policy, then you understand that there are 6 different parts to it. Okay. So thinking about it, 6 different parts of a personal auto policy, a PAP. You're going to have like part A, which is your liability coverage, right? You're going to have another part that's medical payments for personal injury protection. You're going to have another part that's property damage. You're going to have another part that's collision for damage to your car resulting from collision with another car. And then you're going to have 2 other parts that are kind of optional, like this comprehensive coverage, which covers your, loss, your financial loss due to theft or damage caused by something other than that collision, because that's covered by the collision part. So a personal auto policy has several parts that you can kind of tweak and balance based on your needs. A lot of people will say, well, geez, my car is only worth $1,000. Like if I tried to sell it, or if something happened like in a hailstorm and there was hailstorm, a bunch of hail hit it, it would be totaled. So I'm not going to pay for comprehensive insurance coverage because it's just not worth it. I might as well just go out and buy another used car. So this is one of the ones that'll be dropped quick when you're in that situation. If you have an older car that it would be easily totaled. So that is that's why it's not required by law. So what are the different types of auto liability insurance? What do we think? The different types of auto liability insurance. Yeah, so there's the bodily, right? So bodily injury and property coverage, right? So think about it. When you get into a car accident, you are going to want to be covered for protection, medical bills, right? For bodily injury to yourself and to the folks that are injured, other folks that are injured in the accident. But then you're also going to want to have financial coverage for your property and theirs, which is their cars, right? So that is the deal with that. So again, this is one of those areas where I feel like we are generally underinsured liability insurance. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So what does collision insurance cover? We already talked about that. Impact with a car or another object. What does comprehensive insurance cover? And I think we even already talked about that. Okay. I use the hailstorm example, but any, theft, damage from any sort of natural disaster or a tree falling on your car or something like that, it's damage to your car other than being in the collision itself. Okay. So what insurance do you need to cover your medical bills in an accident? Remember to cover your personal medical bills. That's right, Patricia. Personal injury protection. Okay. Personal injury protection. So that's a big deal to have as part of your policy. Okay. Let's ask another true or false. If you have liability insurance and are hit by somebody without insurance, your insurance will cover your loss. Is that true or false? That's false. Okay, so this is it. Again, this kind of goes back to like the question itself. Perfect, Patricia. So you picked up on the key word. So in the question here, it's referring to liability insurance specifically. And you say you have that. Okay, so you're covered for that. But if you're hit with someone without insurance, it's saying, will your liability insurance cover that? The answer is no. In this case, you would need uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage, which is another part of your policy. Okay. So that's another piece that you're going to want to look at if you need it. So your new car is stolen. Will comprehensive insurance be sufficient to pay off your loan balance? What do you think? Some people say yes, some people say no. Albert says gap. Okay. So generally, if your car is stolen, obviously do a police report, right? If it's not recovered, then comprehensive policy can pay out, but it may not pay out enough to cover the cost if you actually have a loan out on the vehicle and you're underwater in that way. So in that case, you can have gap insurance, which would pay the remainder to satisfy the total car loan balance, which is the reason that gap insurance exists, right? In the event of a loss, this covers the part of the cost of the vehicle with a high loan to value ratio, which means you owe a lot on it. It's not worth as much as you owe, perhaps. And so the gap policy, that's why these exist. Okay. By the way, it's also why like an emergency fund exists. But if you don't have the funds to cover the gap, then having gap insurance is one alternative option. Okay. Awesome. I want to just see. Yeah, so we're going to switch here to, before we switch over to life insurance, I just wanted to make sure everyone was kind of clear on the car insurance coverage breakdown when it comes to your liability coverage, because this is the thing that we see so often. So if you were to look at your own personal policies, which I highly recommend you each do as a follow-up kind of activity to this lesson, to this review session, is go back to your personal auto policies, check out the different parts. And by the way, it will say, you know, part A, liability, part B, you know, collision, part C. It'll go through and it'll, you know, medical payments. It'll name the parts and what they do, right? The medical payments are going to be to the others involved in the accident. That if you're at fault, you'll be helping to pay their medical bills with that part. Your personal injury protection will help pay your medical bills. So look at your personal auto policy, start to pull apart those parts and what each part covers. But one of the things you're going to see under the liability section, part A, might be something that looks like this. And it's usually 3 numbers, and it's usually separated by these slashes. So what I was going to ask you all, if you knew off the top of your head, is what each of these numbers stand for. Okay, so we don't necessarily know exactly what these stand for. Okay, so maximum amount of coverage, Michael, and then so Suzanne, per person bodily injury, okay, the 250, you're right there. And then per accident bodily injury, 500K. And then per accident property, 250K. Perfect. So Alicia kind of put it into one word kind of system there, which I love. Person, accident, property. If you can remember that, then you can pull apart what this means. 250K means during if you cause the accident and you're paying out of your liability for the resulting bills, then per person you're going to pay $250,000 up to $500,000. That's correct, Patricia, because your own bodily injury is going to be covered by your own PIP, your personal injury protection, right? So 250K for others, up to 500K for the entire accident. So if there's 4 people in the other car and each person is $100,000 of medical bills, and then each one of them would be fully covered, right? Because they're all under that 250K, and the 400,000 totals under the 500,000 for the entire accident. The 250K is the property damage maximum. So this is what I was telling you about. When I see folks being woefully underinsured, it's usually in this part A, liability coverage. So just want to make sure we're clear on what those numbers mean. Okay, so what do we got? Any other questions? I saw something. Oh, gap insurance and how it works. Yeah, so Hussein, gap insurance is an optional coverage that you can get. It's used a lot with newer cars, because if a newer car, as we know, it depreciates pretty fast. But if you finance the whole vehicle and you go out there and you buy it and you spend $50,000 on a car, and then a few years later, and so you take out a $50,000 loan, right? And a few years later, you go out, 2 years later, you go out and you get in an accident and the car is totaled. The insurer might only reimburse you the cost of the actual cash value of the car, which at that time might be, I don't know, $30,000. But let's say that you still owe $45,000 on the thing. So the gap is the $15,000, right? The 45 minus the 30. And so you could carry a policy to cover yourself on that gap if you wanted. Okay. All right. If you say people are woefully underinsured in their liability coverage, how much would you recommend? The 250, 500, I think, is a nice threshold, Tom, but it just really depends, like on where you live, on the probability of an accident, right? The frequency and severity goes back to that. But I think a lot of times people have much less than the numbers I was just showing to you all on the example. So I don't even think a lot of times they're even in the ballpark of 250, 500, 250. So, you can kind of use that as an estimate, but again, it's kind of it's up to the individual. And again, you can talk to a good auto insurance broker about that. I personally use an insurance broker who helps me with my auto and homeowners. And that's a question I ask him all the time. And by the way, he'll increase my liability coverage usually once a year or once every 2 years, just to make sure that I'm staying on top. If we live in a very litigious society, right? And so we want to make sure that we're properly covered. And if we can handle the premium difference with increased liability insurance, it's always a good idea. More coverage isn't a bad thing, right? So I'm not giving you the advice to go out there and change it to 250, 500, 250, but I would definitely talk to your insurance broker about that. What coverage would be appropriate? And that's probably the answer I would give to a client as well. If we were talking about in a financial counseling setting, if they ask, well, how much should I have? I would probably say something along the lines of, that's a great question for a really good insurance broker for your property and liability insurance. Oh yeah, you're totally right, Lisa. State required minimums make people think that as long as they have the minimum that they're going to be safe, whereas a lot of times the minimum can be very, very low, right? Yep, you're absolutely right. So the lowest deductible is the best deductible, true or false? We already talked about that's very much like a depends type of answer, right? It really depends on your situation. How might life changes impact your need for insurance? So we're transitioning now to kind of the final insurance component. How might life changes impact your need for life insurance? This is a great question. What do we think? Yeah, dependence, Lisa. Having folks that depend on you for your income, for sure. Getting married, having children, protecting your partner. Yeah. Yeah, getting married and having kids are big ones for sure. Are there other okay, yeah, kids with special needs, Lisa. And in that case, maybe you're even thinking about something in addition to life insurance, like estate planning with something like a special needs trust. Absolutely. Retirement, right? Your need for life insurance might change if you're saving for retirement and you know that you're going to have enough to self-insure by the time you're retired, maybe you think that retirement, you don't need life insurance during retirement if the kids are grown and out of the house. Maybe you don't think you'll have enough saved for retirement and you want to use a cash value life insurance policy to supplement your income down the road, which I know, and this is one of those hot topics, right? Life insurance, whole life cash value versus term. And, I would just say, as we've said in previous review sessions, remember, we have to be aware of our personal perspectives and our personal biases. And we have to understand that there's not one way, there's not one answer for everybody, but there's a right answer for everybody, depending on their situation. So yeah, long-term care might impact your need for that type of insurance. There's a lot of life insurance products out there that have long-term care riders, Michael. So that's another point. A situation that increases your level of risk, absolutely. And I was also going to say, if you own a business or you're a partner in a business, people use life insurance for their partners to be able to buy them out if they were to pass or die early. So there's a lot of reasons that you need to relook at your life insurance situation. In life insurance, the policy holder is the person who pays for and designates the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. Does the policy holder need to be the insured person? Correct, they do not. Okay, you can buy a life insurance policy on somebody else. A lot of parents, for whatever reason, buy it for their children, like their young children. I've run into that. And so they don't have to be the insured themselves, but they do designate the beneficiary of the policy. Insured, person whose life is insured, right? So that is pretty self-explanatory. Beneficiary of life insurance. So the beneficiary of a life insurance policy is the person who receives the death benefit. And something you should probably know is that death benefit taxable or non-taxable? Correct. It's not taxable. Okay, so that's a tax-free death benefit for life insurance. And remember, when it comes to insurance, always be able to articulate why you would buy that type of insurance. You buy auto insurance in case you get into an accident or have damage to your vehicle or cause damage to somebody else's. You buy health insurance in the event of needing healthcare coverage, so you can help with that. You buy life insurance in case you die earlier than expected and need to replace your income for those that you leave behind, right? So just want to go back to the main reason for all of these types of insurances, okay? So there are a few primary types of life insurance, whether it's term life or whole life. The difference is this goes back to this hotly contested debate as to whether it's term life or whole life is better. So what is term life? Well, term life insurance is what they also call pure life insurance. It is purely just a death benefit only. And it covers you for a certain amount of time, a predetermined term. And it can be for a while, right? It can be anywhere between 10 and 30 years, these things. It's called pure life insurance. And because it's only a death benefit, it's usually the lowest cost option. And the price increases with age, but you lock in you can have a fixed rate term if you lock it in for 30 years. What that means is that if you buy it at age 25, you can have it level premium for 30 years. So your cost for your monthly premium is never going to go up. But what it means there is that if you were to buy it at 35, then your level premium will just be higher because, the older you are, the more expensive it's going to be to insure you, because the insurance company, according to their tables, is going to say, well, you might have a higher likelihood of actually passing away and us having to pay this out. So they're going to charge you more for it. Whole life, on the other hand, is a permanent policy. It does not expire after a predetermined period, and you are guaranteed to have a death benefit passed to your beneficiaries. Because of that, it's going to be higher cost. Okay. Inside a whole life policy is something called a cash value component. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that inside, it means you're going to pay your monthly premium. Part of the premium is going to go to the cost of insurance, which is relatively high. The other piece is going to build a cash value inside. Okay, and so these things can be, this is the purest form of permanent insurance, is what's called whole life. And why do they do that? Well, they actually do that because they do it so that you can insure yourself by the end of the policy, by the end of your life. Okay. So if you look at this and you just think of a chart here, over here, up here is going to be the level of your coverage on the y-axis. So you say that your coverage benefit is going to be $1 million of coverage. Okay. Your cash value is down here. So over time, your cash value is growing inside the account. Okay, that's this whole chunk that's growing over time. Okay, and you're paying premiums in. And so by the end of the time period, which is what they would, when they would say the policy would be endowed, your cash value will actually equal the death benefit. Okay. So that's the deal. So what happens with your cash value inside a whole life policy when you die? What happens with it? Do we know what happens with the cash value inside the whole life policy? Most of the times, unless it's specifically written in a rider that you get a refund of the cash value, then the insurance company would get it. Well, in this case, they're basically paying themselves back with your cash value for the death benefit. That's how it works. Now, in the meantime, because you've agreed to do this and you're paying higher monthly premiums to build this cash value, you can access that money. You can pull it out if you want. And so this is how these things are sold. They're sold as sort of a savings vehicle that people can use to supplement their retirement income or save for things down the road. This is how they're often sold. But I just want you to remember, what is the purpose of life insurance? Well, the pure purpose is to replace your income if you die early. The purpose of an annuity is to protect your income if you live longer than expected. Okay. And yes, that's correct. So your family gets the death benefit, right? But they don't also get the cash value in addition of so in this case, it'd be 2 million, right? They would just get the 1 million unless there was a specific rider stating that there was going to be like a refund of the cash value or a premium of refund, right? Exactly. So anyway, I think that visual is kind of an interesting way to graphically illustrate how what happens in the inside of cash value whole life policy. It's really a decrease in that way. It's really a decreasing term policy. But anyways, it's probably more than you need to know. Just know term life is the, it can be level term for up to 30 years. You can, and then after that, you're on your own. And whole life is a permanent policy. By the way, the big thing that people say is, you're going to hear this a lot if you haven't already, is buy term, invest the difference. I don't know if there's anybody, you've all heard that, right? If you just do that, then you're going to be covered. And then by the end of the term, you're going to be able to self-insure because you're going to have invested the difference. And you should have enough to self-insure. That would be great, right? And that is obviously mathematically it can work, but it requires it requires that you actually invest the difference. And can anybody take a guess as to how many folks actually turn around and invest the difference? Not a lot, okay, unfortunately. Okay. So that's it. Kendra says, if you use the cash value, is that less the insurance company gets if you pass away? No, it might actually eat into the death benefit for your beneficiaries.
Hey, Derek, can I jump in really quickly?
Please, yep.
Because this is a concept that I only understood, I think the last time you taught this a year ago. I don't think it's very well explained. So when they say the cash value of whole life, that does not mean there is truly a cash element to whole life. What it means is you've paid off that much of the insurance benefit. So when you say the cash value, it's how much they would give you in cash if you traded it in theoretically. So you can't, it's not like this extra thing you get. And I think that's the problem when they try to sell it.
Yes.
There is no cash value. There is no cash. It just means that if you sold it back to them, that's what they would give you for it.
Yes, that is a great other, that is another point to really bring out. Like you can surrender these policies before the date. And by the way, most people do. That's the unfortunate part about these permanent policies. They don't end up being permanent. Statistically, most people do surrender them and they pull out their cash value. The problem is the amount of cash is not built up directly in accordance with their premiums that they're paying, and it's only a small fraction. Yeah. Okay, so we already talked about this, the insurance company. Okay, so Tom asks a great question then. In what situation does that type of policy make sense? Because you're right, normally it sounds terrible, except for those who have needs that are that may extend past the term that they already know of, such as we already discussed earlier, having a child with special needs, or that a lot of folks will use these to create an estate if they have not saved for retirement. So there are alternative needs for permanent life insurance policies that can make them appealing to folks that I've seen them used for. And so there are options out there for folks that might use them, and why. But for a lot of folks that are starting younger, or at least in lower middle aged, having a term policy, and if they can have the discipline to actually invest the difference, I think that's a very prudent approach. But again, at the end of the day, as a counselor, our job might just be to inform and educate about the different types and help folks come to their own conclusion. Yeah. There's other types of insurance like disability insurance, which is hugely important. Short-term disability insurance, a lot of times can be covered with like a 6 to 12 month emergency fund, but sometimes it's provided by employer. Long-term disability insurance is that next step where it can extend short-term coverage. It might have a longer waiting period, meaning that once you actually qualify for getting that coverage, then you might just have to wait for a little while before the actual kicks in and you start getting checks. Usually not paid by employer, but can be. So you might have to go out, if it's not covered by employer, go out and find a broker where you can buy this on your own. Again, this is one of those that are often overlooked, but extremely important, long-term disability. Short-term, again, if you can self-insure, that might be a risk that you're willing to retain, but not necessary if it's provided by your employer. Now, remember, disability insurance covers a percentage of your wages, usually something like 60%-ish or something around there. If you're temporary disabled, short-term or long-term can cover a percentage of your wages if that disability is maybe not necessarily temporary, okay? Long-term care insurance, this is custodial care that's not covered by Medicare. Now, Medicare does not cover a lot of long-term care. It covers some, but it's not very comprehensive. That's why so many people lean on Medicaid to cover their nursing home costs. Or long-term care insurance, which is a pure life insurance product that can help cover the cost for an assisted living facility or at-home care as outlined by the policy. And these things can be written any which way. Long-term care insurance can be very expensive, okay? Which is why now there are new and innovative products out there, of course, like, let me think, like a universal life insurance product with a long-term care rider is an example of one that's being used a lot nowadays. And this is, again, this is a permanent life insurance policy that says if you need long-term care coverage, you can pull from the death benefit of this policy to cover that, and it'll just draw down on what's left to your heirs. So again, this is for folks that are saying, you know what, I didn't save enough. I don't want to use Medicaid, or I have enough assets that I don't want to spend down those assets to qualify for Medicaid. So I'm going to buy like a universal life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. Again, maybe outside the scope of this review session, but if you're thinking you're going to work with a population that might benefit from learning about these alternate options, then certainly you're going to do a little bit more homework on that, or put a knowledgeable, experienced insurance broker on your referral list, so that folks can have that vetted resource to talk to if they need. Okay. You probably want to know about the activities of daily living requirement. and which would trigger you being able to get your benefit from your long-term care insurance policy. Okay. The activities of daily living would just mean a doctor would have to sign off to say that you cannot perform 2 out of the 5 activities of daily living. Activities of daily living are things like showering, getting dressed, feeding yourself, continence, okay, like using the restroom, and transferring, like moving from a sitting position to bed, walking independently. These are all activities of daily living. If a physician signs off that you cannot perform 2 out of the 5, that can trigger your ability to access your long-term care insurance and or like a long-term care rider on another insurance product. Okay. So the steps of risk management, there are 5 you want to know about here. So take a screenshot or take a picture with your phone or just hone in on these as you're studying. Step 1 is to identify risk. Step 2 is to determine the amount and potential of and frequency of potential loss. Remember, that's your severity and frequency. Severity is the amount, frequency is the number of times it could occur. Number 3, choose how to handle the risk, whether you're going to avoid, retain, control your loss, etc. You're going to implement the risk management plan by purchasing insurance if it's part of the plan, and then evaluate and adjust. I think this is a huge step that's so often overlooked, is that annual insurance inventory. Look at your insurance year to year. Look at it whenever you have a major life event, or whenever you buy a new car, or whenever your family grows, whenever you lose a job or gain a job. Like any of those major life events would warrant a reevaluation of your insurance portfolio. And I think that's something you're going to end up, encouraging your clients in your counseling practice to do as well. So this is a great list here, checklist 1 through 5 for risk management. Highly recommend that you internalize that and be able to communicate it as needed. So with that, I think we are done. Okay. So we had some great questions. Are there any questions that I missed, Summer, in the chat panel as we buzz through that?
I have to admit, I am not entirely sure. So if we did miss any, please go ahead and put them back in.
Great.
I did have one. Did you respond to the one from Tom about in which situation does whole life insurance make sense?
Yeah, that was with so that would be for somebody like, again, who maybe had like a special needs trust that they wanted to fund with a whole life policy. So they know that they're going to have a child that is dependent on them for the rest of their lives and then beyond. That would be a situation that I've seen it used, as well as just generating and leaving an estate for their beneficiaries in the event that they were not able to save for their life and do it themselves. And that's one of the things they want to do. That's another reason I've seen it. Another reason I've seen like permanent life insurance policies be used, because there's more permanent policies than just whole life. But the other reason I've seen it be used is if you have a deep family history of like a chronic illness or condition that you think may be triggered later in life, and you want to get insurance now, know that it's going to be around later when you may be medically and unable to get your life insurance. Because to get life insurance, you have to have a medical screening, and they can deny you, a policy if you have certain conditions. So that's another reason I've seen people pick up things like whole life policies when they're healthy, is if they expect they may develop something down the road. So those are some examples.
Hussein asks, is there any alternative for life insurance if someone cannot get any type of life insurance? And I speak to this a little bit, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit.
Please do, yeah.
One thing to consider is why you're getting life insurance. So I'm a single person without kids, and frankly, nobody to leave anything to. So for me, there really isn't much of a reason for me to have life insurance. And so for some people, the answer is they don't need life insurance. For others, the answer is they need life insurance to pay for their funeral costs. Well, the alternative there would be to prepay your funeral, which you can absolutely do. For some people, it might be they want to be able to leave something behind for their heirs. And I'm not entirely sure why this person could not get life insurance, but they could put the money that they might put towards life insurance into, savings, investments, maybe to have money to leave behind for a bequest. The Derek, what do you think? Any other things that I'm missing?
Yeah, no, honestly, most times when people can't get life insurance is because of um, their medical screening. There's a condition there that's preventing them from qualifying. And so if that's you, again, self-insurance is obviously one alternative. The other that I've seen is, just checking with an employer, because group life, you don't have to medically qualify for through your employer. And the coverage amounts may not be as high as you'd want through an employer, but there's still something. So those are just some good ideas. The next, I see this, what about variable life insurance? That's another permanent life insurance product. And it's just like universal life, except that um, your cash value is not just sitting in a general account. It's actually invested in something called a sub account that acts like a mutual fund. So that's why it's called variable life insurance, because the cash value can grow that way.
Before I get to Lisa's next question, I is talking about getting life insurance in the military. If you're actually a member of the military, you should not be getting private life insurance. You should be getting uh, single group life insurance. Oh, I don't remember exactly what the acronym is. Thank you. That one. That's it.
SGLI.
Yes, you want to get that. That is far cheaper than anything you would get outside of the military and with a much better benefit and would actually cover wartime deaths, which most life insurance doesn't.
And that's term insurance. So that's what we're talking about. Oh, if you want something above 400K, grab another term insurance policy.
And I don't know that you usually get a medical screening for term insurance when you're young, do you?
You do. Yep.
You do?
You'll still get a medical screening for all these types. Yep.
Okay. Really quickly, Lisa has a very specific question about somebody with who's a parent with small children who is bipolar. I will say when we get to these kind of really nitty gritty details, you'll want to talk to insurance agents. Derek might be, but I'm certainly not qualified to answer really detailed insurance questions.
This is a great question to have a really good insurance broker on hand to refer to. But this is something, someone who's a parent with a small child who has bipolar and they can't get life insurance, meaning that the child can't get life insurance, but maybe they need that coverage throughout life. So this is where it gets into maybe some sort of like a special needs trust or something like that that can be funded by a life insurance policy that the parent might be able to buy with the insured being their child. And again, this is a great conversation for somebody who's licensed and et cetera. So the parent has bipolar, so that's why they can't get it. Okay, so that might be a great question for like an estate planning attorney or someone like that, where they might be looking at some other products like a special needs trust or something like that.
And somebody asked about SGLI after you leave the military. There is actually VGLI, which is clearly just for people who leave the military who want to continue to keep their life insurance, but you do have to keep paying the premium. So, do we have any other questions that we missed earlier?
A lot of great questions.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.